Is this just because you feel that you've been misrepresented in what you've said in interviews with the Crown?
Well, sometimes. So sometimes I've spoken to the BBC at a rally back in January, and they, I think the journalist said I was one of the most reasonable people they'd spoken to, and yet they don't feature me in the piece. Likewise, with the article about what happened on the bridge, I presume you know that involved me and one of the UKIP candidates. We were. The guy who came around, the journalist who spoke to us, he seemed a really good guy. He heard us out really well. It's just that afterwards, like one of the articles that came out later, in the first couple of paragraphs, it said it was supported by the far-right personality Katie Hopkins, and by inserting those words into the article so early on, it's basically implying that we are basically fascists, if you get what I'm saying.
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, this was just about the incident that you've admitted on Facebook, which is basically that you got into some sort of heated debate.
Yes.
In the old farmhouse in Exeter, and as part of that,
a couple of places, yeah.
Oh, okay. And as part of that, it ended up in a copy of the Quran being singed in a candle.
Singed by a
so
corner.
Do you want to just talk through? Because I think the best way to do this, obviously, if you want to record this, is in your own words. How that situation began and how it ended up in that happening. Because I mean, we're going to be honest with you. I mean, we'll contact maybe the mosque and see what they have to say just in Exeter, just to give the story a bit of balance. But do you want to talk through just exactly what happened?
Well, to be clear, I describe myself. I'm what you could call an atheist activist. So I dislike religious ideas, not necessarily religious people, some of whom I've met have been really, really nice. It's just that, I've always made it clear, it's never been any secret at the time critical of Islam as a religion, in particular as an idea, as an ideology. And some people will have a go at me and want to demonise me for that. And the thing is, if I meet up with someone from a Muslim background to have a chat one-on-one, whether they're a fairly liberal person who lives here or identifies as a Muslim, if they're a slightly more conservative Muslim or an ex-Muslim, I could talk to them one-on-one and we get on really, really well. If I'm in a room full of left-wingers who are 90% white, even some right-wingers are way too defensive of this foreign ideology, then they have a go at me, then I get called racist, offensive, all the usual rubbish. And it's and that's when it descends into the sort of nonsense. I mean, I understand that if you go into the debate all guns blazing like that, like what happened, me holding up the Quran and calling it evil and things like that, or defacing it, then you're not going to go anywhere. But this was at the peak of a heated argument that had been going on for ages, and some of what they were saying, the ridiculous anecdotes and calling me stupid, racist, all the rest of it, I'd say is a lot worse than...
So just to backtrack, how did you even get to this situation where you're holding up a Quran in a pub in Exeter, having a huge debate with left-wing...
Well, I go out and people accuse...
so how did the night start? Yeah. Let's literally
this would have been after... Yeah, so this would have been after... I think it was after the debate with Katie Hopkins at Exeter University. And I was handing out flyers to people who had been there, for Britain flyers. One of your contributors, the guy from the Northcote Theatre, wrote in the Express and Echo complaining about me being there. But afterwards, I was chatting with some students. Some of them, even the ones who disagreed with me, were likeable and friendly enough at first. So people from things like Exeter Uni Students for Europe, and but it was just later on, like some of the people who joined them were calling me effectively calling me a racist, defending Shamima Begum and things like that. And they said to me, imagine if a white girl had been groomed and gone to these Islamic countries. And I said, I don't have to imagine it. It happens. There was, I think, German teenage girls in Iraq and Syria have been captured, and they were involved in ISIS. I mean, Samantha Luthwaite, have you heard of her?
No.
No, well, one of the main leaders of Al-Shabaab in Africa is a white Irish woman called Samantha Luthwaite, and she's a convert, so, it's got nothing to do with ethnicity at all. It's a matter of ideas and how that threatens national security.
When this was happening, this heated debate?
Well, it sort of carried on far into the evening. Sometimes we talked about it, sometimes we didn't, but...
So,
people...
For want of a better word, there was an after-party event at
Yeah.
House, okay. For who?
No one in particular, just a group of friends with different political views.
Okay.
How friendly some of them were, I'd say, in retrospect, is... I wouldn't describe them as friends of mine, but...
So, you're at this event at Firehouse, and then... Why was there a copy of the Quran?
Well, I have it with me in my bag sometimes in case I have to debate people like this. I haven't got it right now, but it's just in case. I can quote verses and such and show them that what the Quran has to say about me for being an atheist, for being LGBT, is a lot worse than what I have to say about the Quran.
So you basically it was your own copy that you had
Yes.
for debating with.
Yeah, it's my own property. I have a right to do with it what I like. I mean, and just because I criticise the Quran, it doesn't mean I have anything against Muslims. I mean, I criticised Twilight by Stephanie Meyer and some of the messages in that. I mean, some feminists say that because she is a Mormon, that her books are trying to encourage these sort of ultra-conservative Christian ideas to young teenage or preteen girls, right? But if you're criticising Twilight for those sorts of reasons, it doesn't mean you hate millions of teenagers who love Twilight.
So how did it get to the point where you singed it with a candle?
Well, I suppose I just lost my patience a bit. I mean, this was after a long night, and it was just a corner just to make the point that I'm not afraid to say what I think. And one of the reasons I'm quite vocal against about Islam is because I see it as a threat to freedom of speech in this country. I mean, there are other threats. I mean, somebody was arrested, I think, 10 years ago for protesting the Church of Scientology with a sign saying Scientology is a cult. And, people were defending this young man who said that. Whereas, when I hold up the Quran and call the Quran evil, saying that it's a threat to freedom of speech, and then later on, say days, weeks later, a policeman turns up at my house for what I've said about the Quran, it kind of proves my point.
Have you actually had any dealings with the police?
Yeah, absolutely. So, like I say, a police officer turned up at my house at the Quran house because I'd called the Quran a book of evil in the Imperial. And another time,
was that recently?
Yeah, it was with a debate with a group at the university. It was a debate. It was a night for informal debates. And then it's quite worrying that students at a night for it will go to what is effectively a debating society and then report someone to the police for saying something they don't like. I mean, when the University of Exeter has produced more cabinet ministers than any university, other than obviously the big two, Oxford and Cambridge. So it's quite worrying that people who could be in governments of the future are this authoritarian, dead against free speech, if you get what I'm saying.
And did you have any repercussions law-wise?
No. The charges and things get dropped quite quickly. The people weren't pushing ahead with this. But some other people are not so lucky, and these sort of things still set a dangerous precedent, I think.
So what about did police get involved in the incident at Firehouse?
No, they haven't.
So that was on social media because obviously people were quite surprised that you're quite open about doing something like that.
Yeah.
It's deeply offensive thing to do. It's quite an important book to followers of that religion.
Well, offence.
Do you realise the offence that you do cause by doing these things?
Well, at the end of the day, offence is subjective, and sometimes you need to. You have to. This is a free country. it's supposed to be a free country. If you want to live here, you're going to have to live with being offended sometimes. And this is how, if anything, I'd say they're more bigoted than me. I see Muslims as equals, and therefore I expect them to learn to live with offence like everyone else. I do. And also that I have quite a few people, including younger people, say to me, in private, quietly, often in a hushed voice, frankly, I can't help but agree with some of what you're saying when you explain it well. It's just that people are too afraid to speak out because people spread lies. There's this ridiculous social stigma, and which comes from criticising a mainstream religion. But I think it's good that more people, especially more young people, are starting to question it as well. Just like how in decades gone by, young people started to question the Catholic Church. I'm not not just me, but for Britain, our leader, our members, we've been very critical of the Catholic Church. We've been very critical of the practices of some African Christians, because obviously some of them commit female genital mutilation in this country as well, and things like breast ironing. Might have heard of that. It's not nice at all. Criticised the Church of England. We even, at the last meeting, we were even criticising the royal family a lot, which is you might not expect from a party called For Britain.
But why are you doing it? I mean, all these people have got their own beliefs.
Yeah.
We're a society that sort of should really, welcome people of different walks of lives and different beliefs. What has made you kind of be this campaigner in Exeter, a city that I can't really see, Islam affecting day-to-day life in the city that much? I mean, you're standing in Exeter on this platform. You're in the firehouse, singeing Qurans. But I mean, ultimately, what has Islam? How has Islam affected your life in Exeter?
Well, I mean, in the last interview with Devon Live about the bridge incident, I mentioned that while we were campaigning for Brexit, someone who identified as an Egyptian Muslim was being very homophobic to me and some other LGBT people at this demo. Similarly, we've had one time me and this hijab-wearing Muslim girl both stopped to help a homeless person. I think that was great. But when I tried to talk to her and when I tried to shake her hand, she said, "Oh no, I can't touch men." Now that to me, I mean, if it were the other way round, if she tried to shake hands with me and I said I don't touch brown people, that would rightly be socially unacceptable. I can't help the fact I'm a man any more than she can help the fact that she has a different colour skin, right? So yeah, that to me is oppression. It's showing that these backward ideas about women and female modesty are present in this country, including in Exeter. And there's been exposures on Exeter Mosque being financed by an Al-Qaeda supporter. That's quite worrying.
Do you find that, though, that when you're doing things like you've done in the old firehouse, people are talking about that and they're not necessarily talking about the matters that you'd raise if you did it in a way that was perhaps a bit more kind of, relaxed.
Yeah.
Where you're not sort of shouting and calling it an evil book. I mean, surely you're just preaching to the converted, for want of a better phrase, in terms of people who are anti, religion and in particular Islam.
Well, like I say, if other people are starting to lean my way, they feel they cannot say it because of this stigma. And also, you need to do something. Sometimes people do need to be out there, provocative, in order to have their voices heard, get their point across. And I do lose patience when some people are so defensive of a religion which is causing huge problems all over the world. I mean, so former Islamic extremists, people who've previously been involved in ISIS or involved in Hizb ut-Tahrir, who are basically Muslim supremacists, will come out and say that Islam as a political ideology is a plausible reading of the Quran. Now, obviously, not all Muslims will follow it that way. There are a lot of bad verses which they ignore or interpret beyond recognition. But that, to me, says the Quran is no good. And I would like to see Islam collapse across the world.
Have you ever burned a copy of the Bible? I mean, some Old Testament verses are comparable,
Well, I've been we're very vocal against a lot of a lot of Christian organisations and Christian practices. So, but I just don't see Christianity causing problems on the same scale as Islam. And I think the truth is, not all religions are the same. I mean, anyone can tell that Scientology is very different from Buddhism, or that the Jehovah's Witness movement is rather different from Hinduism.
I mean, you mentioned earlier that you did it to provoke. Are you a provocative person? Is that what you regularly do? You provoke by doing these things? Is it all about shocking people?
No, I mean, there are some genuine problems which everyone's talking about, which I do want to talk about on a local level. It's just that I mean, that was a one-off, but sometimes you do have to be provocative to talk about, to basically pick up the torch from human rights activists of the past. So I remember, I mean, when Section 28 was in practice, homophobic legislation from the government, people broke into the BBC studios and started shouting during a live news broadcast, repeal Section 28. Quite recently, we've seen a teacher from somewhere in Devon, was one of the people who stripped naked in the Houses of Parliament, in the House of Commons, to bring climate change to people's attention. So you do have to be outspoken sometimes. Obviously, some stuff can be counterproductive, but but some of the worst stuff I certainly call out.
Do you think what you did at the old firehouse was counterproductive to your message that you're trying to spread?
I would have to think about that. Yeah, but it's like I say, it's not something I usually do, and I do acknowledge that if I go into a debate or something, all guns blazing, then that's not going to work. But like I say, it didn't start out that way. And if I'm if I'm talking with a bunch of 90% white leftists, then it's a problem. If I'm talking, just sat down discussing with people from Muslim backgrounds, talking about them, having an honest and friendly discussion, then we get on absolutely fine. And even some conservative Muslims are saying, frankly, there is a huge problem. When I meet people, you talk about how this affects us in Exeter. I meet people in Exeter who are gay Muslims or ex-Muslims who tell me some pretty upsetting, harrowing stories. I really hope you print this and get this out, because it's sad just how casually they tell me, since I've opened up about having atheist views, my family hate me. A family friend told me that homosexuals should be hanged after he saw me being too close to another boy. I tell me things like, I hate seeing my mum wear a burqa. We were beaten and abused and taught to hate minority sects in the mosques. We are, as a party, we're demonised and called racists and bigots and far right all the time. We are actually trying to give minorities within minorities a voice. We had two ex-Muslim women speaking at our conference at a recent meeting in Essex. We had Nisar Hussain, who was almost killed by his Muslim neighbours in Bradford because he left Islam to become a Christian. And they've been practically persecuted. They had to move house under armed guard. And yet we don't... why is it? We all know who Stephen Lawrence is, and yet almost no one's ever heard of people like Nisar Hussain or Assad Shah and so on.
So tell me about yourself, Frankie. I mean, how what's your background, your upbringing? Are you from Exeter, or did you move?
I am.
Here?
Yeah, I am from Exeter. I have grown up here and lived here all my life, and I think that could be part of the appeal. I think when we have councillors on Exeter City Council who live as far away as London or Nottingham, I've heard, then I think some people do want to have the choice to be able to choose someone who not only lives here locally, but someone who has grown up in Exeter.
Did you go to the university then?
Oh, I haven't, no. I did go to Exeter College.
How old are you now?
How old do I look?
I don't know. In your 20s, mid-20s?
I'm 19.
19?
Yeah.
So, I mean, you've lived in Exeter all your life. I mean, it's a predominantly white Christian city. I mean,
absolutely.
Are you in a place to be, telling people how they should, follow how they should spend their life, whether they want to live by a rule book? What makes you the person to tell them otherwise?
Well,
and burn their, the texts that they hold dear.
Well, I'm not necessarily telling anyone, but I'm trying to draw attention to what and what not to do. But you can try to persuade people, and I think what we as a society need to do is give people like ex-Muslims and Muslim reformists more of a voice. So Majid Nawaz, I speak to quite regularly on LBC when I can. But, I have, like I say, I meet people who have these stories to tell. And I have so many friends who, from, say, elsewhere in the country, from London, from working class northern towns, from the Midlands, of a family in the Midlands, and they see immigration affect their town in a bad way sometimes. But they're not. It's not exclusively white English people. I've mates from Asian backgrounds and Eastern European backgrounds, or black and mixed race backgrounds, who tell me about these sort of problems where they're from. And like I say, we're starting to see the same sorts of things happen in Exeter. I mean, after the attempted suicide bombing we had just over 10 years ago now in the Giraffe Cafe, we're not immune to these problems.
So what led you into sort of far right politics then?
It's not far right at all. I mean, I have some right wing views, I have some left wing views, so I don't appreciate the label far right.
So the politics that you're in?
Yeah, I suppose in 2016 we sort of saw the tables of international politics and the sort of the culture wars. That was when the tables really started to turn. What with Britain voting to leave the EU, with Trump going in, we were starting to see the rise of the what you might call the populist side across Europe, across the world. So I used to be, when I was like 14, I used to think that I'd find my home in political home in Labour politics. When I was maybe younger, 15, I thought I was a supporter of the Green Party, but I started seeing started to see that the most vocal elements of the left, the leading elements of the mainstream left in this country and across Western countries, are no longer liberal. And that said, the Conservative government are no friends of liberty either. They're trying to bring in ridiculously draconian regulation on the internet, over-regulation of the porn industry. Not that that's something I want to talk about in too much detail. But, like I say, this excessive, disproportionate focus on hate crime, which usually entails somebody saying something politically incorrect online. Meanwhile, we have ISIS militants fighting abroad and then returning to this country and being allowed to roam free.
Do you want to leave it there?
Sorry?
Turn that.
Oh well, I thought
the interview. Sorry, on your phone, you recording it?
Yeah. Oh, it's facing me.
Yeah, you had to turn it off because it's done.
Oh, I thought we were going to talk a bit more about the crime, about local issues.
No, that's a separate thing.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, sure. I mean, I am a candidate around here, so
yeah.
it would be,
no, absolutely no. It was just. Are you still recording? Then?
Yes.
No, it's just